Good afternoon. My name is Celia Lacayo here with LA Social Science and continuing our amazing book series this summer with our experts from UCLA who have books coming out this year. So I am the Associate Director of Community Engagement, and I also teach in the Chicano Studies, Central American Studies, and African American Studies department. So today we have a wonderful guest, my dear colleague, Norma Mendoza-Denton. Hi Norma, how are you today?
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. So her book, which is co-edited with Janet McIntosh, is entitled Language in the Trump Era, Scandals and Emergencies with Cambridge Press. And Dr. Mendoza-Denton is in the Anthropology Department at UCLA, and she is an affiliated member of the Gender and Women's Studies Department, as well as the Chicano Studies and Central American Studies Department. So we're gonna jump right into this amazing book. With just knowing the title and hearing that title, we can clearly understand how relevant it is right now. So Norma, can you tell us how you and your co-editor, Janet McIntosh, came to decide to produce an edited volume on language in the Trump era?
Thank you. Jenna and I originally organized a session at the American Anthropological Association meetings, and we had a lot of interest, people who wanted to join the session, and it was packed. And this is right, I think it must have been 2017. So right after Trump was elected, everybody got to work, and we had stuff to say. So we did this session, and it was so well received that basically on the spot, we were able to secure a contract with Cambridge to turn what had been a very successful session into more of a fleshed out version of each argument to go into a book length work.
Wonderful. Can you tell us, just in general, the work that you do and the expertise you bring, and as you've done in prior research, can you tell us what is the power of language? How and why is it important to examine?
Language makes up our human condition and is the organizing method behind every society. So without language, we wouldn't be where we are. And one of the really interesting aspects of language as it constitutes groups is that language can in itself be engineered, designed to create a reality for somebody. And that is one of the reasons why this book came together so quickly, because we could tell that reality was changing under our feet as a result of language that was being used and linguistic changes that were being made, both in terms of certain agencies not being able to use the previous language that they had used. For instance, environmental agencies were barred from talking about climate change. So you take away the words climate change, and suddenly so many of the things we are tracking go away. There's no way to track them if you can't say the words. You take away the keeping track of certain markers of illness, and our understanding of an illness will radically be impacted with the way that we are trying to put linguistic labels on things. And those are just lexical examples. But there's also examples in the tone that, I guess the shading that particular words can take, and the way that people will use collocations. So if you use one word close to another word, right? Like Mexican rapist, right? That winds up becoming associated in people's minds. And that's one way that we can see that language is changing right as we are listening to it. So I think for me, the previous work that I've done has been on the language, well, in the politics, like straight up political system vein. I've worked on the Supreme Court hearings for now Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, and on the way that Anita Hill was interrogated So I did some of my early work was on that. And later on, I followed around Congressman Jim Colby, who was a Republican in Arizona, and followed him around to town hall meetings and to the floor of Congress. And so looking at this data of town hall meetings got me really interested in conflict. And I've also worked in conflict in other ways, looking at the ways in which Latina girls involved in gangs talk about conflict and enact different types of political positionalities.
So exactly, just as you're saying that language is much more so than meets the eye, so to speak, and it has a great impact. And the book does an amazing job with this. Can you tell us specifically how has the language Trump has used to describe women, Latinos, Muslim, and folks in the LGBTQ community impacted our society?
With regard to the way that, let me start with Muslims. So one of the ways in which the language that Trump uses has impacted Muslim communities has not only been to sort of call people terrorists. This is a very kind of common thing that President Trump will do. He will call particular individuals terrorists, but it's not all Muslims. He's not treating everyone the same way. He will make distinctions between different kinds of Muslims. So places that he is personally affiliated with, for instance, my rich Arab friends, are not painted with the same kind of brushstrokes as Muslim terrorists. Right? So he will have certain ways that he organizes language around Muslims when he's trying to speak about Iran, Iraq, and so on, and Palestinians, and a different way that he'll organize his language when he's trying to speak about Mohammed bin Salman and some of his other friends. So people that he's friends with, he'll speak very highly of, and he'll say, there's some of my best friends. I was talking to him last week. Everything is good. And then on the other hand, out of the other side of his mouth, he'll be talking about all Muslims are like this. They're a threat to America, and so on. So that's just in the realm of Muslims. And that's the article by Professor Omar Boom, who is also a professor here at UCLA in my same department. So now, as far as Latinos, we have another professor who is in Chicano studies, Professor Otto Santa Ana, who has done a lot of work on the ways that Latinos are portrayed in the public media as a whole. So he has a book about metaphors that are used in the media to talk about Latinos. And those metaphors include metaphors of invasion, metaphors of containment, metaphors of illness, metaphors of natural disasters. So immigration is like a tsunami, right? That just sweeps everything in its path. Immigration is like a disease. And so because we can understand the broader metaphorical frameworks that the media draw on, we're able to kind of place the ways that, for instance, the New York Times over many, many years has talked about immigration. Now, based upon that work, he's able to go in and look at the way that President Trump has talked about migration. And especially he and his students contributed a chapter to this book. It's called Making Our Nation Fear the Powerless. And that's a chapter that recounts the work that they did with an amicus brief for the DACA situation. And one thing that I think stands to be told here is that even though they were victorious, the DACA lawsuit was in a sense favorable to the DACA recipients, it has not yet been enacted, right? So people are not getting the permissions that they need to stay here, even though they were victorious at the Supreme Court level. So I think that that's one important thing to know, is that language will set up the stage. Language will, in a sense, lay the groundwork for our reality, despite how things might turn out in the courts, for instance.
And again, so, this is really critical that you all are examining and really accounting for how these narratives have huge impacts. And can you talk about, with the new platforms like Twitter and other social media, as well as a 24-hour news cycle, where that increases the circulation of these Trump's narratives? What does that impact look like?
Okay, so when we have the 24-hour news cycle, what it means is that people will pick up on something Trump says right away. And of course, a lot of people live tweet what he says, but we have one chapter in the book that is called "The Significance of Trump's Incoherence," and that's by Professor James Slaughter at University of Texas at Austin. And never before in current memory, I guess in living memory, have we had a president that needs exegesis in the newspaper. Right? So he will make a speech and then people won't understand what he's talking about. And the papers will literally print a column that contains the speech and then a side column, almost like a dual language reader, like a side column that unpacks the references that he's making, so that when he says Sidney Blumenthal, everybody's like, who is that? Who is Sidney Blumenthal? That only means something to a very specific subset of people, right? It's what some people would call a dog whistle. Right? So when you have a specific reference that no one can make sense of, it belies, the fact that people say that he is incoherent. In fact, it's extremely well organized and well put together. How he's able to make these call outs to specific groups and still maintain what Adam Hodges calls plausible deniability. So he's able to maintain plausible deniability while at the same time making these call outs that the rest of us need exegetic translations of. And I think that being able to do that in this quick turnaround also means that, just as we're getting a hold of what exactly that meant, there's another scandal to pay attention to. So the kind of cycle of distraction is much faster than before.
So right along the lines you're talking about, what do these narratives say about Trump and those who agree with him?
I want to point our listeners to an amazing database where a lot of us got information, and it's called FactBase, and it's spelled factbay.se, right? FactBase, but it spells FactBase. And this particular compendium has collected all of the tweets, all of the interviews, they're transcribed and tagged, right? And all of the blogs, the video blogs that he used to have a video blog, believe it or not. And one thing that you can see in this particular database, like let's say that, for one of the chapters, I was interested in how he talked about crying, right? Because it has to do with gender, it has to do with affect, masculinity, like what's the deal with Trump and crying? Well, you're able to go in and just look up cry and crying as just like you would in Google, and out come all of the examples and they're tagged with their video. Now, if you look at the way that Trump uses crying, as we get further into the present moment, he's been doing, before he used to say, I never cry, he used to make fun of people who cried. Right? But later on, he started saying, big, strong men cry when they talk to me. Big, strong man, like a big fireman, was crying, saying, thank you for saving America, right? So he essentially created almost like a script, a little script where he would slot in different kinds of big, strong men that for different reasons, sometimes there were groups of them, sometimes it was just one. Occasionally it could even be a woman, and they would be crying in front of him. So it turned into making fun of crying in general when he was a younger man, to now it's like I make people cry. They are so moved in my greatness and in my presence and by America that they begin to cry. He does these gestural things that are just, for an analyst, they're amazing, right? Like we have another chapter, one second, I can't find it. What's it called? Okay, it's called Trump's Comedic Gestures as Political Weapon. And that's by Goldstein, Hall, and Ingram, who are at University of Colorado Boulder. And they have, if people can pick up the book and look at all of the excerpts of his gestural grammar that are just incredible. This chapter covers the incident where he made fun of a reporter who was disabled and he was flailing around. It covers the incident where he was talking about Hillary Clinton tripping. So much of the things that he does, as he makes these epithets, like these pithy little nicknames that he has for people, like, you know, Sleepy Joe or Little Marco, these epithets serve to kind of put us in his mind frame, right? We now, it's really hard to look at Marco Rubio now and not think Little Marco, right? Because he went on about it for so long and it was in the airwaves so much that now it's almost associated with the actual person. But he also does these comedic gestures and they wind up being associated in the same way with people, so that all he has to do is maybe utter part of the gesture and the entire argument comes back to you. And I think that that's also one of the amazing things that's so powerful about language. Another thing that I looked at was the way in which he would use the determiner the in front of group names. So ask the gays, they love me. You know, I have great respect for the women. Nobody treats the women better than I do, or the blacks. And a lot of people find this very divisive because it creates a situation where you have this determiner that, you know, it's our definite determiner. It's not just any blacks, it's the blacks, right? Like it makes them into a monolithic group. And it could be argued that this is actually an effective age because it used to be more acceptable to say something like the Italians or whatever in the US. So it's possibly an age-graded effect, but you just never know, right? And if it were, then possibly one of his advisors could have told him that this is how it comes across, and he's just, you know, not going with that. So many of these things have that plausible deniability built in. Like how can you get upset over the use of a determiner, such as the, instead of lack of the determiner? But that's where we are.
Well, I think what you're also capturing, which is critically important, is that these associations, like you had mentioned earlier, Mexican rapist, really saturate into people's minds, and that begins to affect how people think of that group and then their policy preferences and how they vote. So these are all really, this is very political what you're capturing, and as you're saying, that these narratives are effective, have been proven effective often for Trump. And so in that way, it's very clear that the book and the individual chapters all looking and examining at language, but as you're saying, telling us a larger picture as to how Trump has been able to really set forth his agenda. So Norma, our last question for you, and you know, for me and our colleagues, this is an easy one, but for other folks, tell us why this is an essential book to pick up right now, and for professors to assign this semester for their students leading up to the election.
Well, one thing that I think is important for us to really understand what's happening in the debates and for the election is to have a way for us to be able to catalog the discourse strategies that are coming out of the current administration. So if we're able to pinpoint exactly how language is operating, to put across a point, to vilify somebody else, to make an allegiance. When we're able to pinpoint the discourse strategies, we're able to understand our own place within the body politic. And so I think no matter what the persuasion of the students, and let's be clear, like we really want to include all of the students in this conversation, right? We don't want to make this into a hermetic, into a tightly sealed container where only one kind of person can agree. No, we want to reach every single student and every single person in the public that we can, and tell them, you need to understand the kinds of discourse strategies that are coming out of the administration or coming out of any politician, so that you can understand how you're being positioned. Now, one of the strategies that I talked about is called reactive reversal. And in this strategy, the president will say something that's outrageous. It will just be like so far out of anything anyone's ever said that it comes as a shock. And then in the second stage of this, there will be a blowback from the public, right? The public will say, no, that's impossible, you can't do that. And then the president will back down in reaction to the blowback. And then at the last stage, he'll say, well, no, that's not what I meant, or it's actually not, I did not say that, you thought that. I didn't say that, you thought it. But then in the end, the first thing that he proposed gets carried through anyway. And so we saw that happening with the so-called Muslim ban, right? The so-called Muslim ban was really the trial balloon, as George Lakoff calls it, to a much bigger kind of change, of which we're still seeing the development now. So now we're seeing that, H-1B visas are being held back, that students' very presence in the United States is being threatened. But all of this, the groundwork was laid by the so-called Muslim ban, which presumably was defeated, but not really, because we're still suffering the effects of this. And so you can make predictions with these discourse strategies. You can say, okay, now we're having birtherism 2.0. Now he's gonna go back on it because, she's an American citizen. So he will have to go back on it, but then still it plants that birtherism seed, and who knows, maybe down the line, we may have taking back of the birthright citizenship, right? Which could be the end goal to begin with, right? So, all of these tiny discourse strategies are actually, we're on a train and it's going somewhere, and it behooves us to understand where we are being taken with language.
And this is exactly why the book is so brilliant, in the sense that you are actually capturing not simply discourse analysis, but these discourse strategies that actually have a political impact on the entire society. And in each of the chapters, you and your co-authors do that, piece by piece, and break that down. And so again, looking at and really thinking about how this book shows that language is powerful and it carries a lot of power, and how, as we've seen with Trump, it has power all the way down for policies, and that really, again, are going to determine people's lives. So we want to thank you again. Thank you so much. So make sure that you pick up this book, Language in the Trump Era, Scandals and Emergencies. And again, this is Celia Lacayo with LA Social Science. Make sure to subscribe and check us out on YouTube. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.